Hi, I'm Jay Phelan. Let's learn some biology. Could you make it as a cab driver in London? Think about it. If I were to ask you, let's say, in Westwood, take me to the corner of Kinross and Broxton. Could you do it? Kinross and Broxton? Maybe Weyburn? It'd be tough. Now think about this. In order to be a cab driver in London, to get your certification, you have to master what they call the knowledge. And the knowledge is for this 6-mile radius in London. There are 25,000 streets, there are 20,000 landmarks, and you have to pass a test that shows you've mastered all of these. Typically, people study for 2 years or more in order to study for it. Lots of people don't pass it, a significant percentage. It's a very serious thing. So, take a look at that. You got to know all of the streets. You have to know everywhere to go. And even in this day of GPS and Uber, they are still holding strong in London. Some researchers thought, hey, we're interested in the brain and how the brain works and how it adapts to activity and things that you do, use. So they thought conventional wisdom for ages has been that neurons in adults don't grow or reproduce. You're pretty much set with some amount of neurons when you're born, and you lose them as life goes on. That's it. But the idea was, hey, here is a profession where the individuals doing it have to really work their brain, a very specific part relating to spatial memories. Using MRI imaging, they looked at the size of the posterior hippocampus. This is the part of the brain that is important in consolidating and storing memories, particularly visual spatial memories. What they found was this. They compared at first, they looked at cab drivers and non-cab drivers. What they found was, as they predicted, the posterior hippocampus among taxi drivers was significantly larger than among non-cab drivers. Think about that. We're trying to figure out, why is it that they would find among cab drivers, posterior hippocampus is larger than among non-cab drivers? Because you have two different interpretations you can make of this. One, you could say lots of people start trying to be cab drivers and turns out to be a really hard job and you lose lots of people. The people that stay, the ones who can do it, are the ones who at the outset just happen to have a gigantic posterior hippocampus. So they're good at it, they can master it. The alternative would be everybody's more or less the same. The people who do it for a long time end up with a larger posterior hippocampus. So this first study was really suggestive, but there were still a lot of criticisms that we didn't know which it was. So they then undertook another study to address that issue, and it was a really, I think, cool study and well controlled. They looked at a bunch of people who were going to train for getting their certification as a cab driver. So they start them at the beginning. They measured the size of the posterior hippocampus at the outset. They also have some controls, individuals matched for age, socioeconomic status, who are not going to prepare for the test to get certified. So at the beginning, everybody's is the same. They then go 2 years of training. Some of the people pass, some don't pass. Now they look at size of posterior hippocampus at the end. And what do they find? They find that those who qualified for certification had a significantly larger posterior hippocampus. Those who did not pass the test, smaller. And in fact, those who did not pass the test, theirs was the same as it was at the beginning. Theirs was the same as the controls. The only thing that had changed was the after measure among the people who passed the test. They also looked at, based on logs that the participants kept, that the people who ended up passing spent significantly more time preparing for it. And they also gave them a bunch of other memory tests, mental rotations tests, spatial memory tests, and their improvement on all of these was significantly greater than we saw in the non-qualified trainees. or the controls. So it's a pretty good demonstration that something's going on. The posterior hippocampus is getting bigger. The cells are getting bigger. Can neurons grow and maybe divide in adults? Well, contrary to long-held beliefs, the answer is yes. We're not sure. Are they growing? Are we getting more? Or are they just getting bigger? They're still doing research on this. A lot of people took this and they said, hey, use it or lose it. That it might function, the brain might function like muscles, where if you work out, they get bigger. They thought, hey, if we give you, for instance, brain training, lumosity, something like that. We give you a whole bunch of games to practice on that you'll get better at a bunch of other things. Your cognitive performance at things will get better. And it's an interesting idea, but so far in some pretty well-controlled studies, the findings have been that if you train with lumosity games, you get better and better at lumosity games. But your skill, your performance on other cognitive tasks doesn't seem to be improved. Let me tell you about another phenomenon related to the brain. There is a genetic condition called hereditary sensory autonomic neuropathy type 5. It's a mouthful, but what it means is that if you have this, if you're born with this, pain sensations can't reach the brain. When I first read about this, I first learned about this condition, I thought, wow, I'm not a fan of pain. That sounds really good. I'd love to have something where I don't feel pain. I read about this condition first in reference to a girl at the time, a very young girl named Gabby Gingras. And at first when she was born, her parents said, oh, we just thought she was quiet. We take her to the doctor to get shots, and she didn't cry at all. We just thought, hey, she's chill. Then they found, as she got a little bit older, when she became a toddler, outside she was running around once playing and she cut her foot and it was bleeding, but she didn't notice. And they went out and, a little bit of blood can go a long way. They were terrified. There was blood everywhere and she's just playing, completely oblivious. That's when they took her to the doctor and they found she couldn't sense pain at all. Her brain didn't register. This is a rare condition, but it happens enough that we know a lot about it. The people who suffer from this turns out to be a really dangerous condition. So contrary to my naive initial thoughts, there are a lot of dangers associated with it. So for one, you see here Gabby Gingras, when she's a little girl, she had to wear goggles. Kids who have this, they will do things like take a pencil and they'll put it into their eye, because they don't feel pain, so they just think it looks cool. She would take rocks and gravel and she would put it in her mouth because she could hear the sound as she would crunch it up, but she damaged all of her teeth. So her parents realized, okay, we have to figure out ways that we can avoid these bad outcomes, knowing now that she's unaware when her body should be sending pain signals. So here's a related question for you. Every now and then you'll read in newspaper or article or see something on TV where someone will claim plants feel pain. We've figured out a way that we can record it, and they actually are. They don't have the way of speaking the way we do, but they experience pain as we do. Now, think about this. Based on the Gabby Gingras condition, do you think this is true? Because you can figure out the answer. Think about, what is the function of pain? This is the result of natural selection. It is an adaptation. It increases your fitness. Now think about a plant, a tree. How's that an adaptation? I'll let you ponder that. We're going to see that in humans, we have two different systems, hormones, which we've talked about a bit, and neurons, the nervous system. In both cases, they are systems that allow us to take in information from the external world about stuff that's coming at us, or sensations of heat or potential dangers or food or something like that. We take in the information, we can process it, and then we can respond appropriately. But we're going to see they have some important differences, and we're going to look in the next few videos at all the different ways that the nervous system works and the useful things that it can help us with. The way the nervous system is organized is this. you've got two different parts. You have a peripheral nervous system and a central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system starts with a bunch of sensory receptors. So your ears, your eyes, your mouth, your nose, you can smell stuff, taste stuff, and so on. You hear stuff. All this is external stimulus that is being perceived by your body. So you have sensory neurons that are specialized to detect this stimulation and convey it to your brain. So here we have some hairs that are from the inner ear. With changes in sound pressure, they move. And when they move, they cause little bits of force that is going to be detected in these cells, and your brain can decode that movement as sound and turn it into words or language or other things. Here they are all bundled together. There might be 20,000 of these within your ear. And in fact, as you get older and some of that hair goes away, you're less sensitive. So a hearing aid typically is going to amplify the signal. So you don't have as many hairs, but if you amplify the signal, you can move them around more and still pick it up. So you've got the sensory neurons that are like the antenna system, picking stuff up, and then it goes to interneurons. These are the connections to the sensory neurons, and they go to the spinal cord and the brain within the central nervous system. These are the cells that are going to process and interpret the information, integrate it with previous experiences you have, other knowledge you have, other information, and so on. And then they're going to send it out via the spinal cord to your motor neurons. Here's a picture of the brain, part of the central nervous system. It actually doesn't have a lot of sensory receptors on it. It's hidden away inside your skull, underneath bone. So think about it. It's not getting a lot of information from the outside world. That's why, kind of strangely, if you ever have open brain surgery done, they anesthetize around your head and they will make incisions, and then they take a saw and they literally have to cut through the bone. They open it up. You can talk to them. There are lots of cases where people will be conscious during brain surgery. Here's a picture of a guy, Brad Carter, and he has this condition called essential tremor, which causes people's hands to shake. And it turns out it can be corrected with the implantation of an electrode in your brain that lets out regular impulses to the neuron. Somehow that stops the signals that cause your hands to shake. A few years ago at UCLA, he had this surgery done, and it's being done right here, but he was awake for the whole time because by being conscious, he could give them feedback on did they have the electrodes in the proper place. He live blogged the whole surgery, and he would play his guitar to see if he had the dexterity. That's what they were hoping to fix. The central nervous system processes what it gets, and then it sends out some instructions to effectors. And effectors are your muscles or glands saying contract or secrete a hormone or something like that. First you take in the signal, then you process it, figure out what to do, then you send out the instructions for what to do. So again, this is the peripheral nervous system once it gets past the spinal cord and brain. For instance, here you see a bunch of motor neurons. So these are cells of the nervous system that are each attached to part of a muscle. They send the instruction to contract. Overall, we say this: the nervous system's function is going to be to collect information about the internal and external environment. So you could feel something inside as well. You have sensory neurons there. It processes that information, and then it responds by sending signals to the muscles and glands to act appropriately. The basic unit of the nervous system, the workhorse cell, is the neuron. It's a cell, so it's got a cell body. It's got a nucleus with DNA that carries the genes, coding for the production of everything the cell needs. Here's a picture of what they look like, large cell body. Here's another one. You see the large cell body, but they're unusual in that they have a lot of things that project from the cell. So we see here, for instance, dendrites. They're the part of the cell that is going to receive information, and there are lots of them, and they branch all over the place, coming in contact with other neurons, but also with the outside world. Here's a picture where they are stained in red. You see them branching. This is a constantly changing process. Here you see a neuron. It's grown on a petri dish, but you can see the little dendritic spines. They're starting to grow out. So depending on how the neuron is being used, which signals are coming in, you're either going to get some of those or they're going to be pruned away. Then you have one long projection called the axon. This can be 3 feet long and reach all the way from the spinal cord, say, to your fingertips. And this is covered in this fatty substance, myelin, that's going to insulate it like an electrical wire. Here you see a bunch of axons. They all get bundled together into nerve. So neuron is the individual cell, but when you bundle lots of them together, then it is a nerve. Here we see them. It looks almost like an electric wiring diagram, sending these neurons, these axons, to muscles or things like that. At the end of the axon, you have what's called terminal buttons, and these are slightly enlarged knobs. We're going to look a lot into them, where it is going to come in contact with either a muscle or a gland or another cell. Here's what they look like. They are filled with these little tiny vesicles that are themselves filled with neurotransmitters, chemicals that are able to send a signal to the adjacent cell. Here you can see in red, that is a muscle cell that this neuron is bumping up against and is going to be able to send a signal to contract or not contract. Here we have a close-up of a nerve. So you see all these axons that are covered in myelin, and they've just been chopped through, but you see the insulation, and then you can see the actual part of the cell. The nervous system has lots and lots of neurons, and they're the cells typically that get most of the attention, but there are other cells. There are cells called glial cells, and glial cells are like the support staff, the entourage of the neurons. There are way more of them, 10 to 50 times as many within the brain. They will do things like produce the myelin to insulate the axon so it can conduct signals. They will make junctions to keep the blood-brain barrier secure so that we can control very carefully what gets into the brain and what doesn't. They provide nutrients to neurons and do all sorts of other things. They turn over at a relatively high rate. Here I have a picture here. In green, we have glial cells. These green cells here are able to provide nutrients to the neurons. Here we have in red and blue the glial cells. You get a sense that there are a lot more of them. All right, in subsequent videos, I'm going to talk about how does the neuron work and how is this going to get translated into our thoughts and feelings and memories and sensations and motivations and all of that. But I'll stop here. There you have it.